the wrong event. So let me fix that super quick.
Oh.
And
yeah,
stop and update. React Native flag. Streaming for. I'm just grabbing that. I just killed the stream again. Cool. Updated all my titles and everything.
Cool.
And there we go. Cool. Nice.
Yeah, the quality looks great.
Now we're talking. Much happier.
Yeah.
Sorry about the issues there, y'all. Turns out that Jamon has some internet constraints, and M1 performance for OBS isn't reliable yet, to say the least. So
it's saying I'm quiet.
You're quiet. I can turn you up on. Actually, I can't turn you up on my end. Can you turn your gain up a bit?
Yeah. Let me work on that. Hold on one second.
No rush. Oh, I know what that might be. That might be the way I have the audio cut. Give me 1 sec to fix that. Actually, studio mode.
Yeah, I think my audio is decent on my end.
Yeah, I have a gate that cuts desktop audio, so I need to not do you through desktop audio.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And now that I switch to that, testing.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
How does that sound, everyone? Audio levels a little better?
Sounding okay?
Yep.
Much better. Okay, awesome. Darren says it's a feature that I'm quieter. Yeah, I appreciate that, Darren. Darren works for me.
Howdy, y'all. But yeah, sorry about the delays to get it started and the chaos with the setup. It's always a little hard. I still have the notification for the 420 stream. My bad with that.
My business partner will love that. He will very much love that. Okay, cool. Well, we were talking before this that sort of about, you grew up in Massachusetts, and kind of how did you get into tech and stuff like that? I'm really curious about this.
Yeah, I had, to say the least, an interesting start. I had a different background. I was mostly focused on like skiing and skateboarding, and really wanted to take like the skiing thing seriously. Ended up getting really hurt and couldn't do it as much as I was hoping to. And as a result, I just got addicted to video games, honestly. I was playing a lot of Minecraft, and code for me was the thing I needed to make my Minecraft servers in a state where my friends couldn't break all my stuff, because they were all dicks and just wanted to break my things. So specifically, like, I learned SSH, Git, and all of the like tools around running a server before I wrote my first line of code, which I think is one of the superpowers that really helped me. Is knowing Git before I ever wrote code allowed me to write code and deliver much more effectively with way less fear.
That's an unusual path. Most people learn to code various ways, but Git is going to be something that they add on later. So it makes sense that that's the direction you would go. And then you like Twitch wasn't your first job, was it? Like
yes, it was. That was fresh out of college.
Fresh out of college. Okay, cool. And so you would then, obviously, we talked a little bit already about what kind of the different jobs you had, and you did a whole lot of different things, touched a lot of different pieces there. And I can kind of see, based on what you described there, how that led to Ping in some ways. But were there some other influences that led to you starting Ping?
Yeah, first I want to give a little context to like my audience, since I'm live on my channel right now as well, and they're all curious like who's interviewing who. Let's do intros for my audience. I'm
Good
Theo.
call, yeah.
You guys know me. This is. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jamon Holmgren, and I stream not super often, but like I'm trying to do about 2 times a week, and I'm founder and co-founder and CTO of Infinite Red. We do React Native development. And I've been coding since I was 12, and I'm 40 now, so I've been doing it for quite a while. But
coding longer than I've been alive.
My thing right now. I know, yeah. It's starting to get to that point where I could be. Anyway, let's move on beyond how old I am. But yes, I could.
For the question of who's interviewing who, I was invited kindly onto this show, which is
Yeah.
particularly kind because I haven't written React Native in quite a bit, and I haven't shipped it in even longer. So it was
Yeah.
really exciting to get an invite onto this because I'm still super passionate about React Native and love to talk about it and the experiences I've had with it. But
Yeah.
here we are getting to
Yeah.
chat with one of the legends that made React Native developable in the first place. Like the amount of impact Infinite Red and like the original Ignite templates and all the tools,
Yeah.
like React Native was something I could play with because of the tools y'all made. And it's really cool to, on the other side, get to chat with you guys.
Yeah, it's super cool, and you know, I'm obviously a big fan of Ping. It's really cool. I'm excited to try it out some more. And but yeah, thanks for the kind words. It's super cool. Uh, yeah, so we've been doing, you know, at Infinite Red, we've been doing React Native since it came out. Basically, we were doing native mobile apps before that. We've done web, we've done all kinds of stuff in the past, but really now we're pretty much just React Native. That's all we do, and that's pretty rare actually. There's very few agencies that only do React Native. Most of the time, it's like React, and oh, by the way, we do React Native, and that's just not what we do. We do React Native. That we deep dive into that. That's what we do. So, um, but like my the reason I stream is well, partly it's fun. As CTO, I don't get to code actually all that often anymore, and as I said, I've been obsessed with it since I was 12. So uh, it kind of gives me an excuse to go and work on our open source and hang out with people who like React Native and whatnot. It's just a lot of fun. And you and I interacted recently, and we're probably going to talk about it a little bit, but we interacted recently about an article I was writing about Flutter, Flutter versus React Native.
Shout out Luke,
And
our one Flutter fanboy that's level-headed enough to have the conversation.
yes, Luke was awesome. And I had him look at the article, and he gave me some really good feedback. Probably didn't agree with everything I wrote, but he's like you said, he's level-headed, and he gave some really good stuff. You actually did a video, a YouTube video. I think it was it during a stream?
Yeah, it was a clip of a live stream where it's just like enough
Yeah,
people were asking me about Flutter. And I was like, okay, I need to just rant about this for a minute. And the rant was
yeah.
good enough that we clipped it and throw it up on my channel.
I love it. And I took that, and I used you know, sort of like some of the concepts that you brought up there as some inspiration for my article, and I ran and I watched Luke's response to that. He went through and kind of gave a lot of talk about, or kind of talked about all the different things that you did, and gave his own perspective, and I used that. So it was a fun one. It took a lot of work to put that article together, but I really appreciated your perspective on that. So you don't do a lot of React Native anymore, but you have done quite a bit in the past. You did some at Twitch, right?
I tried. And this is going to be our first fun deep dive. So
Yeah.
One of my hot takes, and I would very much love your stance on this.
Yeah.
I think for, in particular, media companies that don't have dependencies on specific native things, not shipping React Native is irresponsible. And I will never understand how any like media company that needs to keep up with their users and their creators could ever not take advantage of the awesome things that React Native enables, even just for the better code push standards, like the ability to swap out the JavaScript bundle that runs your like app at any point is magic.
Yep.
And it's magic that's not taken advantage of by the right people way too often. And that combined with the reality that most of those media companies already have a big team of people that use React building their website, or even their average engineer happens to know React because they're all full stack and make changes to the front end. Siloing your mobile team into specific technologies for specific devices just is chaotic, in my opinion. And I'll never understand why that became the standard, and why a company like Twitch has an engineer like me that has contributed to every single surface at the company, be it video infra, the GraphQL endpoints, the infrastructure that manages all of that, or any of the front end clients, be it the native apps on Windows, the like music app on Windows, or all of the crazy stuff that we were doing for the Mac apps, and obviously for the website for Twitch. I could not make changes to the mobile app.
Right. Yeah, and I think for a lot of these things, it comes back to it's more of a human element more so than any technical decision, anything else outside of that. It's a human thing. One of the I've studied this a lot because obviously running a React Native consultancy, we deal with a lot of times like our competitors aren't necessarily other React Native agencies. The competition is not doing it in React Native. That's kind of the competition. And so when we're talking to clients, they come to us and they're like, hey, we're thinking about doing a React Native app, but we got this native, we got the Android team, we got the iOS team. We're kind of like trying to figure out how to do this. It's so like, it's like organizational dynamics oriented. Everybody knows like the Airbnb story from back when they integrated it. Actually, maybe not everybody does. It's been a few years now, but basically they tried to go React Native. They had some internal champions. I know some of them, and they tried to push this forward and it ended up failing. And I know why it ended up failing. It was not because of the technical side of things. It was just totally dynamics, culture, all of those things. So I share your frustration in that.
There's a legendary Toby tweet I want to share quick. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to.
Yeah.
I'll just.
By the way, chat, we are paying attention to it. We'll get to you.
There's a lot of good questions in both of our chats. I'll be sure that we chat all about that. I'm just going to window capture. I don't know if you're watching the stream, but this tweet.
Yeah.
Because somebody asked, Airbnb had an article about how much React Native blew away their expectations. And somebody said, didn't Airbnb do the same thing and give up? This is Airbnb's mobile team. One of my favorite tweets ever.
It's fantastic. I remember seeing that when it came out. That was great. It's true. But a lot of things were kind of stacked against them specifically because they never really had buy-in at the very beginning. And so when their internal champion left, like the main guy that was doing it left, then all of those cracks kind of like just fissure, it's just like everywhere. And but the good news is that since that time, React Native has continued to spread simply because you're exactly right, Theo. You were saying like it's irresponsible. It's kind of true. Like when you look at building an app and you're looking at, okay, we want to build all these experiences, and we have web, we have Android, we have iOS. Why is Android always behind? Or why is iOS always doing not doing the right stuff? Or I don't know what. There's always something going on there. If you can combine those things and you can actually deliver a good experience, because I've been around this industry a long time. There have been systems that have purported that they're going to do this and it hasn't worked. Like you do PhoneGap or Cordova or whatever, and it just doesn't give the experience you want. It leaves everybody with a bad taste in their mouth. And the very first time I heard about React Native, I thought it was the same thing. I thought it was the same stuff. But then as we dug into it, we're like, no, this is something else. So I totally get that. What I'm reading between the lines is that was happening at Twitch to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to come out and say it at this point. I'm frustrated, and this should have been fixed a while ago. In 2017, like in like peak Ignite era, when React Native was still getting its shit together, to be fair, before we had things like Expo and the module linker and all the fancy stuff that makes it way easier to npm install a CocoaPod, things were a little chaotic. And an engineer at Twitch that was on the mobile team at the time did a deep dive for like 2 weeks investigating React Native as an engineer that had no experience on web and was purely a native engineer. Came to the conclusion we shouldn't use it, wrote an article that's still on the Twitch blog to this day about why React Native isn't ready for Twitch. And I had a sit down with him like 6 months later. We agreed it probably isn't ready yet. We did another sit down like another like year or so later, where he was like, yeah, it's probably ready now. He ended up moving to a web team because he was so frustrated with mobile for various reasons, falling in love with React. And then right around like a few months before I left, and one of his final things was I had just started a hackathon team to rebuild the app in React Native. He gave us his blessing and said he regrets writing the article right before leaving. And it was such like a rite of passage moment that I loved. And that to me felt like, okay, the thing that's always been held in front of me is why we're not doing this. Like, look, we already investigated React Native 5 years ago and concluded it's not ready. Why do you think it's something we should use? We already said it shouldn't. And I would say literally every point there is outdated, and it doesn't matter because the article already existed and the person who wrote it regrets it. So yeah, if you're ever writing an article for your company about why you shouldn't use something because it's not ready, reconsider.
Yeah. and make sure that people know this is the time period that we're talking about here, because I wrote an article recently about, make sure you do this for React Native, because otherwise it doesn't work right. But I put in there, this will probably become outdated quickly. This is when I wrote it, and just be aware of that. Like it's not gonna, it's right now it's still fine, but probably in 6 months it's not going to be. So yeah, I totally get that. Boy, there's so many stories, so many different things we could go down. We do have a bunch of questions in chat. Do you want to get to some of those?
Yeah, sure. I saw a couple people asking about specifically Fernando Rojo and the work going on with Solido and the stuff there.
Yep.
I actually would love your thoughts on this. My TLDR, I actually streamed with Fernando, I think a month or so ago. We talked a bunch about Solido right before he released it. And I am not as aligned with a lot of y'all on React Native for web, I've realized. I think that the web is its own platform, and you should architect accordingly. And if it feels like making the same change or building the same experience on your React Native app and your React app is writing the same thing in two places, that's because your logic sharing story is bad. I personally find that the UI for my app and the UI for my sites are different enough that I want to rewrite the JSX. I don't want the same JSX between both platforms. I do want the hooks to be the same. I do want that logic to be the same. So if I can make a shared package in a mono repo that imports the same hooks in both things, now I've taken the hard, scary part and abstracted it in a way where I can easily consume it on all platforms.
I think I'm actually more aligned with you maybe than you think, in that I love the idea of being able to share components in certain cases, and there are some places where it really does make sense. And sometimes when we're talking about the web, people are consuming it in a mobile context, and in that case you have some similarities, but they are different things. And I think you're right. There are definitely, you have to be thinking about the web, especially in a browser, especially on a computer, on a laptop, or in like an iPad or something like that. People are just using it differently, so you have to be very aware of that. I'm very much on board with that. We interviewed Fernando as well on React Native Radio before he this was probably 6 months ago or something, and he was kind of circling this concept already. He was kind of getting that direction. He's been doing a bunch of work there. He's a super talented engineer. I mean, I'm super impressed with him, considering how he's still fairly new to the industry, but he's fantastic.
The amount that I say, like, the one specific thing about him that's really impressive for me is how effective he is as a solo dev. A lot of his decisions aren't made to scale to a team. They're made to scale his productivity as far as possible. And I think when you think of it in that mindset, in that framing, it makes a lot more sense why he makes the decisions he makes and builds the things he builds.
Yeah, and that's totally like legitimate way to go but you also have to be careful, like you said, if you're in a team environment, how that works. But I do think that it's going to be compelling to companies for good and bad reasons. It's going to be a compelling thing for them, Solido. I still want to I'm probably going to have him on React Native Live, my Twitch channel, at some point, to hack on it and just kind of play around with it and see what what it's all about. I do like Next, and I know he's kind of like using that as a platform to springboard off of as well. My personal website's been in Next for years and years. So I think I don't have like super firm opinions yet, but I can say that I really respect him. I like a lot of the stuff he's doing. I think that you're right, that there are some situations where you're not going to want to just take a mobile experience and just dump it on the web. That doesn't totally make sense to me. But it's, I think that there's some good stuff that will come out of that over time. It's not like, sorry, I'm not giving the question like a very firm answer, but that's kind of where I'm at right now with it.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I also a huge Next.js user. I will say fan overall. I've been more critical recently, especially because I think that there are things that we could be doing to make the experience in Next better, and we're not doing those enough. There's a little too much commitment to backwards compatibility and not enough commitment to fixing mistakes, and almost zero commitment to type safety. To be careful, or this will become a whole separate rant, but almost none of these full stack frameworks are properly considering that they own both sides. They can make a contract in between them. I think Redwood's one of the few that does this, which is why it's interesting to me. But I tend to roll my own contracts like with like TRPC to take my TypeScript backend and tell my TypeScript front end what it can expect.
Yeah. We have some ways to kind of align those two pieces for sure. Yeah, but I mean, I think, I guess what's exciting to me is that stuff like Solito is enabled by React Native. You know, that's what's exciting to me. The fact that people can experiment and see what works, see what doesn't. That sort of experimentation can feel a little bit chaotic sometimes. It's like, oh, another library, another thing I have to learn, you know, etc. But in the end, I think we all benefit from it. And I'm seeing in your chat as well. By the way, Dax Pseudo, thanks for saying that you're a huge fan. Appreciate it. It's really nice to see. Who's interviewing Hugh? It's kind of both of us, because like we both have a lot of, I respect Theo a lot. He's got some good opinions. He's got some good experience, and I do want to hear a lot of things from him. If he has questions for me or your chat, I'm always happy to talk shop, of course. So
definitely want to chat about the future of React Native and some of the crazy things around the new like rendering engines and such, but we can get there when we get there.
In fact, my business partner Gant and I are doing a talk about it in San Francisco in a couple weeks. We're going to be at Reactathon in the park if you're there, and we're going to talk about the new architecture.
We'll make sure I am. Reactathon
in the park. Yep.
In the park. Putting that in a tab so I can look at it after the show. I will be there for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, then I'll meet you there. We're going to give a 25-minute talk about the new architecture and kind of just give a good overview of it. Also, a little plug for React Native Radio, my podcast. Robin also is on the podcast, and we have a few other hosts. We interviewed Kevin Gozali from the React Native core team. He works for Meta, and talked about a little more, like in more detail, what is involved in the new architecture and stuff. And actually, if people are interested, I can chat about it here as well. But Dax does say, I started with React Native, not React, and I like the idea of React Native first. One of the things that I think is interesting, and I've said this before, I don't have like a strong opinion. It sounds stronger than it is. One thing I think is interesting is the idea of React Native is a little more abstracted than React, because React, like especially React DOM, is like, hey, here's a div, here's a span, you know, like it's using web terminology, where React Native is like, we're going to try to be kind of like generic, you know, it's a view, and a view can be web, it could be a div there, or it could be a UI view over an iOS, etc. So I kind of like that idea of React just being this platform of, or this, it's more like a pattern of like, you know, we're gonna describe our user interface, and then we're gonna render it on a specific platform. So to me, React Native Web is what React could have been. It's like you can keep it more abstracted than that. Not losing sight of the fact of what you said, where you still have to think about the web as a different experience, but more in terms of the tech.
Yep. My concern with React Native is that I don't think the build and deploy story is there enough for it to be a good like faith recommendation for a newer developer. Like it's just so frustrating to, I don't know how to put it other than not be able to ship because your build pipe's annoying, or like there's some weird bug for Android and you don't have an Android phone, or you just happen to not own a Mac, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And with web, especially in like the modern Vercel era, where you can npx or next in it and you're good to go, and now you can type Vercel in your CLI and it deploys, that's really hard to beat. And
it is.
I think Expo's working really hard to get us there in React Native, and they will be the key to us eventually really being there. But I think we're still on the way.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. All of that. That's exactly right. EAS is super cool. On the website, it's probably not there yet. They're trying to get the mobile, the native side a lot more dialed in. I think they're going to get there eventually. we've actually done projects where we do React Native Web and we mix it in with, with another product, and sometimes not even a React one, where we're just sprinkling little React Native Web widgets around a different hosted project.
Very interesting.
So that's kind of an interesting one. So there's different ways to approach this. It's a lot of it's, what's necessary for the project. Really quick, I know there's more questions. Can we talk about Twitch Studio really quick? If you don't mind?
I'm down.
So when I started streaming, I was like super excited about Twitch Studio because I was like, I want it to be as simple as possible. I don't want to be messing with, like deep in the bowels of OBS Studio trying to figure out like what a bit rate is. And this isn't my thing, right? Like I'm a coder, but I don't really know a lot of this stuff. So I pulled up Twitch Studio. I was really happy with it because it was like, yeah, this is like simple. It's just the stuff I need, only the stuff I need, right when I need it, that sort of thing. But my computer had trouble with it. I guess it's probably Electron based, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it was just having a lot of trouble keeping up. Now this was before my new computer, which would probably be fine with it, but it was having a lot of trouble. You can't multi-stream, obviously, send it over to YouTube, things like that. So, but what was your experience working on it, and what are your thoughts about Twitch Studio right now?
For a long time, Twitch had a strong philosophy around creator tools, specifically that it wouldn't build them, because I'm gonna approach this in like the best steel man I can. I think that Twitch tried to take the React approach here, where React didn't ship with real state management. It didn't ship with anything related to animations. They didn't consider styles. React was built to turn state into like your DOM, and if your state changes, update your DOM relatively quickly. That's all React did. Twitch is the best way for a live content creator to share content with viewers and chat and interact with those users. It does not care about up until that ingest point. It just cares about from that point forward, how do we make the best interactive experiences between the creators and the users? And I think that was where Twitch's strength was, and that focus is what got them through the first 8 years even. They specifically did not build creator tools. They did not build a streaming app. They did not build the software needed to stream because the open source world had done that. It almost felt like imagine if Wix made their own operating system instead of shipping on Linux, like a web builder, somebody deploying websites for people doing drag and drop, insisting that they have to run their own operating system for those deployments. That's how it felt building a streaming app at a company that was building on top of a standard already with RTMP. As such, Twitch didn't invest in creator tools until the Xbox One and the PS4 were shipping. At which point they partnered with different those two console manufacturers, to actually get a capture card and hardware built in to do proper frame capture and streaming on machine. And to this day, there has never been a major streamer that got started on PlayStation or Xbox. The company spent millions of dollars putting hardware and software into consoles for both major manufacturers to have to spend a bunch of money on infra for one viewer streamers. It was a mistake, period.
Yeah.
At the same time, Twitch had just acquired Curse, the game mod client turned into a chat app competing with Discord because Discord was too expensive for Twitch's taste. So we had this Curse company. They were a big React and TypeScript house. Twitch was entirely Ember.js and Rails. It was a shit show. So they refused to work on our website and rewrote the whole thing in React Native and TypeScript. I got to be a big part of that. It was really cool. Yeah. And after that, and moving all of the website into the Curse desktop app, which was an Electron frame and shell, they wanted more to do. They wanted to build in more on the Electron app. So they eventually convinced the company to let them build a new streaming app focused on lowering the bar for entry, and made a bad OBS clone with fewer buttons for a while. Eventually we pushed pretty hard. I was on safety at the time. I convinced them to move me over to Studio to really improve the experience there. And the React side wasn't written by people who knew much React, to be frank. And I think that was one of the biggest problems there is there was a lot of talented native engineers and Electron engineers basically just exposing bare metal via JavaScript and expecting me to hit it every 60th of a second. It just was not realistic. The amount of like crazy updates and polling and shit that go on in that app is absurd. On the Mac version, the volume meter was doing over 70% CPU utilization on my maxed out 16-inch MacBook Pro. So I had to rewrite the entire like volume like monitoring layer so it wouldn't destroy your CPU. That's probably why you're having problems on it performance-wise before. It might just be the volume meter that I had to rewrite. But so many dumb things like that we had to care about. Is this partially Electron's fault? Yeah. Building something that complex in Electron is a tough experience. But God, the investment was in the wrong places. And I still firmly believe that. There were some really talented people on that team that were misallocated, and I think the result of that's been a lot of it like folding since I left. And I don't know what the current state of things is. I know that there's hardworking people there. I just don't see them shipping much value, especially with the current product leadership. They don't get it. My manager at the time was actually streaming 4 days a week, and he was using OBS, even though he was the manager for the studio team. And I had to rail into him on that to get him to change his behavior. Like, it was demoralizing working on a team where they're not even using the thing that you're building.
That is a huge red flag. Yeah, you don't want to do that. Oh, man. Because, I mean, you know, I have this little side project I started recently where I'm building an app for my family. Just for my family. I'm not going to sell it. But, like, it's something where I'm motivated to work on it because I'm using it. I'm using it to, you know, like have a shared grocery list, things like that. My wife can add stuff to it. I can add stuff to it. If it doesn't work, I feel the pain and I go out there and I fix it. And if you're not dog fooding, if you don't have enough confidence to even use it in your own streaming, that's not great. That's not great. Because there were kind of, you know, like just super annoying things that if someone was to use it, it's like they would see that and they'd be like, let's fix this. Let's prioritize fixing this. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts here. Let's just fix those things. But yeah, I totally
remember
get that. Wow.
Specifically, one of the first things I was like expected to do on that team, since I had built mod view, which was the very dynamic, every widget can be moved, docked, removed, resized everywhere. It was weird that mod view was more customizable than studio. And I was brought on to do that. I got almost no design oversight and actually no product oversight. I just had to do it all myself, which was weird. Thankfully, I had gotten enough from my experience on the safety team with the awesome product and design leadership over there that I could carry that experience over and copy paste enough like concepts to make a decent user experience. It was so frustrating because I wasn't streaming at the time. I didn't have the time to because I was keeping like 3 code bases afloat and auditing a couple other teams and helping them hire up to build new products. Like I couldn't be streaming and testing the product as thoroughly as I needed to. And our QA person was great, but couldn't catch everything. So with this huge rewrite, I shipped it as a separate like root for our app under a feature flag, begged the whole team to test it, and nobody would. So eventually I got like manager approval to turn this on for staff only and got the most heated bullshit from some of the people on the team because their dev experience was broken and they thought it was their code and it wasn't. It was something I broke. Cool, fair. But I've asked you to test this for 2 months and I shipped it as staff only and you're going to burn the house down because I made it because you took half an hour to realize that your code wasn't why your build was broken. I'm sorry. We need to get the app working and you need to use it.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I was thinking of a story. I probably can't tell it right now. It's been a little too soon since the last time. We have some interesting stories about very similar situations in things that we've been consulting on. And of course, as a consultant, you don't have a lot of power a lot of times to make sure that things are tested, make sure that people are using it. And, you know, I want to really quickly jump over. Dax Pseudo says, can you ask Jamon how he feels about services like Turbo Repo with React and React Native? Should they be separate? A lot of my experiences, you know, kind of like, so like Turbo Repo is, I guess I haven't used it enough to really have a big opinion on it. I think that the tooling is getting better. When everybody was using Lerna, it was just horrible. Just constantly running into issues. I got a very bad taste in my mouth about monorepos in general because that was always the experience. Always dealing with problems. I was like, I just want to code. Why am I constantly fiddling with tooling that won't work, with dependencies that don't support it, everything. So when you're talking about monorepos, it really depends on what you're using to build that. So I think that there is a case to be made that you could put them together. I tend to bias toward not putting them together. I tend to bias toward sharing code in other ways. And there's a variety of ways you can do this. But yeah, again, it depends on the size of your team, how you want to set things up, how well your tooling is set up. I am a little more amenable to monorepos now that the tooling is getting better, that there's different options out there now, like turborepo. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. What about you, Theo? Where are you at on monorepos, putting React and React Native code bases in monorepos, etc.?
I agree with all the parts that you described of how painful it is. I very much think it's worth dealing with that pain for the wins that you can have. There's actually, I'm gonna screen share once more. Let's just go to Zart. There is a repo by my friend Alex, the creator of TRPC. Okay. Are you watching the stream? It's probably easiest for me to just put there.
I have it up.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, I will just do that then. Where did I lose this tab to? Cool. Let's add window capture. Cool. So here is Zart. This is Zero API React and TypeScript. It is a mono repo that has a React app through Next.js, a React Native app, and a TRPC server that's served through Next. Are you familiar with TRPC by chance?
I'm not.
Actually, I just realized it'd be way easier for me to switch this to the game cap view. It's a little sketchy because I did not set up my layout for this, but good enough. I'll just move my guest box down. Sorry that we're different shapes. This was not prepared.
It's okay.
Anyways, this repo blew me away because it takes the magic of TRPC and combines it with React Native in very clever ways. TLDR on TRPC is a way to define TypeScript functions on your back end and call them on your front end without building a layer in between. Normally you'd use something like GraphQL or REST APIs to hit an endpoint, expect some data, and then shape that data, validate the data, do something to assure it is what you expect. The magic of TRPC is you chain a router with a bunch of functions, and from there you have a backend. So here we have .query all, which has an async resolve function, which fetches from Prisma all of the IDs and titles for every post. You can query by ID, which has an input that's a string, and it resolves the Prisma post where ID is this. Since it's using Prisma as the backend, the thinks here like post. This is type safe. This is getting back the right shape from Prisma. So when we query this on the front end, which we do very simply, I'll find in the React Native app, hello world, trpc.useQuery. This string is type safe. If you don't type it correctly, it will type error and it will autocomplete in VS Code. Posts is the type safe result of what you get back from the backend. You have posts.loading, posts.data, which is the actual type safe result. And if you make a change on the backend, like if you were to unselect ID, this would type error because it expects the ID, or in this case, item, because it's what's being used here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And like smart re-rendering there when things change.
Yep. So this is using React Query under the hood.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah. All TRPC's client React side is a very minimal, I think it's like an 80 line of code, maybe a bit more, wrapper around React Query that gives you a type safe query and mutation syntax on the TRPC library.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yep. And since in the end you're just
Miracle,
writing
this is live.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was talking to chat. Mirkal, this is live right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I'm going to dig into this a lot more. I've got it bookmarked here.
Yeah, the magic of tRPC for this is unreal. Like,
yeah,
one of the big mind-blowing moments for me at Ping was I have a handful of earlier career devs that are super talented developers, but they're new to like working on a team and like delivering full stack solutions. I had an engineer who has been doing a lot of the like internal tools that we need. Like they built our admin panel and they did it in like 2 days and under 100 lines of code, full stack, like adding new queries and mutations in the backend and like hitting them on the front end. Yeah. They have been hitting like features after feature out of the park. Yeah. We started working on new video info to do some transcoding stuff with our recordings. And they were going to have to spin up like an AWS cluster in a box and get everything set up. We diagrammed it for 2 hours. They totally got it. But then at the end, they're like, I do have one question. I'm like embarrassed to ask, but I really need to know. And like, I should know this by now. What's an endpoint? Up until that point, 4-5 months into their career with me, they've been able to deliver full stack solutions in our code base without ever thinking about what an endpoint is.
What an endpoint
because
is.
They're just writing functions and calling them.
I love it. I love it. That's so cool.
And
That's
this also means when you eventually, you probably will have to move off of tRPC because you have some team that insists they have to hit your API in Golang, and they really want that. At that point, all you wrote is a bunch of functions. You could even write a code mod that puts these all in like an express router or just dumps them into GraphQL and quickly turn your tRPC endpoints into whatever else you need because you had to write these functions and validators anyways. This is just using Zod. This is a standard validation syntax that you can use anywhere. Yeah.
And that's the benefit of using TypeScript everywhere, where, you know, JavaScript to start with and then TypeScript everywhere. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Have you, by the way, that brings up, have you tried anything like Rescript or anything like that?
Not particularly, no.
I haven't either. I mean, I've done in the past. I did some like Elm and I did Elixir. I did Ruby.
I did a lot of Elixir at Twitch actually. That was what I did all the video.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Great language, very cool. But like at the end of the day, like, and I do like Rescript. There are some really, as far as what I've dug into it. There are some really cool things. There's good bindings for React Native and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're a consultancy, so like we're gonna do what's probably gonna hit the 95 percentile rather than the 5 percentile. So that's really the main reason why we're focused on TypeScript, and TypeScript is really good. Yeah. But yeah, it allows you to share this all across all these different applications.
Yeah. The RPC actually started around this particular idea. There was a repo someone posted forever ago. It has like 7 stars. No one ever looked at it, called Obvious RPC. It was like subtitled, "The RPC that's so obvious you'll wonder why no one wrote it before." It's like, I have TypeScript on my back end. I have TypeScript on my front end. Why do I keep putting something in between the two? Why do I have to put a weird JSON like Swagger standard in between the two? Why do I have to put GraphQL in between the two? Why do I have to like add gRPC in the mix? What if I had the TypeScript function on my back end and I had its inputs and outputs inferred on the front end? There's a couple gotchas here, specifically around the transformation of the like if you send a date time from your back end to your front end that has to get serialized through JSON, you no longer have a date time, you have a string. So we use Super JSON as a transformer that is built, I think it was originally by Formidable, but now it's maintained by Blitz. It is a superset of JSON that allows you to encode maps, date times, and anything other than really like a function or a class, and honor that across like JSON boundaries. So by having that in our query client in React Query and in our backend that expects it, we can now actually return anything but a function on the backend and have that contract honored on the front. I also saw one person asked about Telefunk. I've needed to air this one out for a while. The Telefunk maintainers are dicks and have no interest in bettering the community. They just want to look cool on Twitter. I ignore those guys. They're useless. I don't say that often about people. They're assholes. Just don't bother.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. No, I mean, what I like about this too is that like you were using Prisma, but like you can, it seems like it's kind of backend agnostic. You could use whatever you want.
You could deploy it through Express. I've seen somebody deploy it through Deno.
Yeah.
You can deploy it through
Yeah.
anything that can like server request response syntax. It's yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna dig into this some more for sure.
Yeah, one of
Rodrigo asks,
one cool use case I want to share with you for this, because as you said, it's not Prisma specific. It's not anything specific. And one of the like use cases I've seen that's really compelling for TRPC is if you have one of those old Create React apps that has like 15 backends underneath, and there's no standard for how you communicate with those backends. I've seen people use TRPC with Next.js to offload all of those differences into the TRPC router, write the type safe like system and solution there, give it the typecasting there, and then the front end has a fully type safe like single place to hit. And you can, in the router, start replacing things over time. It's a really good migration path if you have one of those nasty 5 backends, big old Create React app, to move over to Next.js, port all the weird queries into the backend, and then have one thing to hit for your front end.
That's really cool. Yeah. Just kind of proxy them, like have your own nice API for that. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see. Infrared, any experience using React Native with some map libraries like Google Maps, Mapbox, etc.? Question about the performance side. So I think, well, we've used all of those, Mapbox, Google Maps, etc. And there's pluses and minuses. A lot of them are pretty heavy, and they're, I don't know, the state of the repos hasn't always been the greatest. Now it's been a little better lately, I think, but over the course of us using, well, we started with React Native 0.11 or something like that. There were times where it was just kind of broken. So that's definitely been a tough one over the years. I do think that the new architecture is going to help that quite a bit, especially with the performance side. Maps is one of those things where you can definitely, I guess the user experience can be tough to hit when you're interfacing with the JavaScript side and you're running over the bridge and there's a lot of data going back and forth. You're scrolling, you're pulling stuff here and there. It can be problematic. So I think that the new architecture is going to enable some better experiences with some of those things. I mean, they all have their pluses and minuses, but you can definitely do performant maps. You can definitely deliver good experiences with maps. We've done it all the time. It's just you have to allocate more time to make sure that it's that it's good. So that's kind of where I'm at, Rodrigo. I think it's going to get better with the new architecture.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the new architecture and how it's going to change. Like, it's been a pain for library maintainers, but the power of a truly like asynchronous update flow to let you do things on native more easly, it almost feels like what web workers promised and never delivered on.
It kind of is. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And of course, React Native 0.68 is out now, and that allows you to enable to flag the new architecture, which the new architecture is basically 3 things. You've got Fabric, you have Turbo modules, and you have code gen. There's some other stuff too, but like that's kind of the main thing that is kind of grouped under this new architecture. And you can enable it with a couple flags. And it sort of flips, from being asynchronous first to being synchronous, which allows, it's kind of weird because you have React, like React 18 with concurrent kind of features, is trying to go more async. But if you do that on React Native, you run into problems because essentially the nature of React 18 with concurrent, I don't want to say concurrent mode because that's not really a thing anymore, but concurrent features is that you really need something that can be synchronous on the back end. And of course, going over the bridge doesn't allow you to do that. So the new architecture flips that on its head, allows you to basically call directly from JavaScript into native. I know you already know this, Theo.
This is for everyone else. I'm so happy I don't have to go on the right myself. I'm gonna take a second to drink some water.
Exactly. And so you can actually use like JSI, for example, is a JavaScript interface. You can call, C++ functions, native functions from JavaScript, and it's just a direct call. You're not like sending a string, having it, like serialized, unserialized, figure out what to call it, then serialize, send it back over the bridge, unserialize, and then you're in JavaScript again. That's kind of like this whole long process where now it's just call something, get back the return, just like basically at full speed. And so that enables for React Native 0.69, which is coming fairly soon. I don't know exactly when, but it's coming fairly soon, for them to enable React 18. And then that gives you concurrent mode. It gives you all the cool features of all that. And it allows us to build stuff that is straight up just concurrent. You're not having to wait stuff that should be synchronous. You can just have full speed, animations and whatever else. All those things just controlled all from JavaScript, which is the goal here. So I think that there's going to be a lot with this new architecture. There's going to be a lot of benefits here. I mentioned that in my Flutter article as well, that a lot of the complaints about React Native from Flutter developers and Flutter stands is they're based on pre-new architecture, and they may be valid complaints, but that's being addressed.
My argument's always been that those complaints are valid for a very small subset of applications being developed, and it's similar. Like, Electron won for a reason, and I don't think we talk about those reasons enough. Like,
it's true. Yeah,
there is a very real cost of like developer effort, energy, and time spent onboarding onto new things and technologies, and real impact in how those affect delivery. An app like, I love Elgato to death. I'm using their microphone right now. I actually really love their software. But if Wavelink was written in Electron, it would probably get updates a lot faster, and its UI would probably have gotten to where it is now in 6 months instead of 3 years. And the amount of power, at the very least, to get things out quick, make changes, and figure out what works on React Native is unreal. And as such, I've always leaned towards using its strengths in that way. Like, you shouldn't move to React Native. You should move from React Native because you have a very specific thing that it's not doing for you, but it should be the default. And I feel like it's not treated like that enough. Electron has gotten there, I would say, thankfully, where like if you're not making an Electron app, you need a reason. Yeah.
And there are reasons, and actually one of the places where React Native kind of actually goes beyond Electron is, this is actually kind of a big complaint I have about React Native developers. Unfortunately, they're too reluctant to drop into native. Sometimes you just need to drop into native. Go write it in native. It's fine. And then just send back an interface to React Native. It's fine. Like, you still get all the wins. Let's say you get 95% wins and you have to write 5% of it in native. That's okay. You didn't have to write 100% native, on 2 platforms. So there are situations, like you said, where, okay, React Native falls over. Example for this might be, actually, there was a complaint on Twitter, and my mind's blanking right now, but it was a valid complaint about it. But I was just thinking to myself when I read the tweet, was just write that in native then. Like, just write that component in native. When it's done doing what it needs to do, have it send back relevant information, straight back to React Native, and you've got it. I posted in chat the article that I wrote with some feedback from you, Theo. Appreciate it. About Flutter is better than React Native in all the ways that don't matter. And the reason that we're using that title is because Flutter developers they like to focus on, well, it's better in performance. It's better in this like particular thing of developer experience. And by the way, some of those things are arguable. Sometimes they're right. But a lot of those don't matter, because at the end of the day, you have to think about the human side of it. You have to think about the organizational dynamics side of it. You have to think about all those things. And there's nobody who's sitting there with a giant Flutter or Dart team working on web who's like, now I need a mobile app, and is like, okay, I guess, I'll use Flutter. It's not a thing. People don't do that. There are plenty, though, that have giant React teams that say we need a mobile app, and then they use React Native. And that just makes sense to me. It just makes sense. It's like, it's a very natural step from React to React Native. There isn't a natural step like that for Flutter. Now, maybe you could make an argument about Java. If you have a bunch of Java developers, you could switch to Dart. It's not the same language, though. Dart is not Java. So I don't know. That was just a little side rant there.
Yeah, I want to speak to this from the web dev side, because I have a very different experience and a very, very Like I started doing Elixir video infra at Twitch. That
Mm-hmm.
was my first gig, and I somehow
Mm-hmm.
ended up rewriting a bunch of the front end. And that's I just moved all over the place.
Yeah.
And as a result, got to do awesome things and work on awesome
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But
Yeah.
man, I have a lot of frustration for people who don't look over their side of the wall ever. And I feel like
It's
that is
true.
the average person just overall. They like to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a comfort versus growth thing or what, but people like
Mm-hmm.
to hang out where they're comfortable and they pick their place and they
Yep.
hang out there. React Native's a really comfortable ground to hang out in. React for Web's a
Mm-hmm.
really comfortable ground to hang out in. Golang's a really comfortable ground to hang out in. What I like
Mm-hmm.
about things like Next is they almost force you out of that by making you
Mm-hmm.
consider all the pieces. Next.js
Yeah.
is a back-end framework. It is not a front-end
Mm-hmm.
framework. It is a
Yeah.
back-end framework
Totally
that
is.
happens to build front-end really deeply into it. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that about it. And I think
Yeah.
that React Native both had and consciously failed the opportunity to force web developers to be more considerate of native needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think they did that by choice. There's so much demand for the Hasuras of the world where you give them a schema and they give you an API and there's nothing
Yeah.
like you can do about it from there.
Right.
I like owning my shit. I like understanding my shit. I like building in a way that every piece does what it's supposed to, and if it doesn't, I can replace it. And as such, I have to be full stack. I find that I'm often pushing the people I work with to be more considerate of the other side. And as a result, they'll often end up on the other side. Even on the Twitch Studio team, when I was working with the native C++ devs, they all hated React because they had a bad experience with it. I actually convinced two of them to use it a little more, and one of them became a full-time front-end dev because he liked it so much. And I really want to have developers think less in their spot in the walled garden and more in the vertical like pipe from database to user when they're building a thing. And every person at Ping builds full stack solutions for the problems they're solving for. Even our designer makes database changes and writes like backend code because it's all the same code base. It's all the same package JSON. We have one package JSON that serves all of Ping, and that allows us to. It makes everyone an owner in a way you can't be otherwise, and it prevents the problem I saw at Twitch, which is the iOS Twitch devs were more Apple developers than Twitch developers. They cared more about Apple than they did about Twitch. They made great native features, and you bet your ass we were the first company at WWDC with widgets on iOS when you still couldn't ban someone from chat on your phone. They don't use Twitch, they use Apple. And all the best developers on the Twitch iOS team eventually leave to go work at Apple because they don't care about Twitch. And that killed me. It's not even that they were being hired because they did enter something there. It's they want to live in their iOS box. They don't want to live in the Twitch ecosystem. And that's the hardest part about not going over these barriers and experimenting the level below or above where you are, is you never get to see the whole picture. And as a result, you often never get to see the user.
Epic rant, and I agree with it. It's all the graybeards are nodding, by the way, right now, or at least a lot of them. I know for myself, I've done many different languages. I had to just out of necessity, to kind of like I started with PHP. Well, my professional career started with PHP, and I could have stayed in there. I could have continued to do that. I could continue to be a PHP developer and really focus on that. I moved to Ruby. I did native, Objective C, and a lot of other things. But I always say that like every time I learn a new language and I learn a new paradigm and I go into a place where I'm uncomfortable, I get better at the previous things too. Like the things that I used to do, I get better at. I go back with a fresh perspective. I start writing better code back there because I bring back really interesting things. I actually think you're probably right to be critical of React Native in some degrees, but I also think that that's one of the magic that makes up the React Native community. And I've tried to, there's this sort of thing where native developers feel a little bit threatened by React Native. It's coming into their space. It's like, hey, these JavaScript web developers are coming in and telling us that we need to do this way. And it's a very different, weird world. And they kind of cowboy code this stuff in ways that I don't like and things like that. And when I've talked to native developers, when I'm trying to kind of like get buy-in from teams, I say, we need your perspective in React Native. That's what we need. We need native developers to come into React Native and add their perspective to the mix, because it's all those collisions of, you've got all these web developers. Maybe some of them go way back and they've done back-end web and they've done front-end web. And then some others are coming in, brand new, and maybe they're React developers only, and that's all they've ever done. And they have certain perspectives there. And then you have Android developers, and they're going to bring their perspective, and iOS developers, they bring their perspective. I know when so I talked to the engineering manager of mobile at Squarespace, and he said that when they switched over to React Native, they literally they had like a floor of a building basically with their with a few different teams, and they said, okay, so the Android team's over there, the iOS team's over there, the web team's over there. Scrap all that. They ripped all the desks out completely. They totally changed the architecture of their office to make that one team, and they put people next to each other. This Android developer is trying to figure out something in React Native at the same time this web developer is trying to figure out something in native, or in React Native, and they were able to help each other in ways, and kind of the best ideas kind of win out, hopefully, between all these different things. So I see that, and I've been on both sides of that. I was a web developer, I was a backend developer, then I was a kind of more front end ish, and then I was more mobile, native mobile, and then React Native. So I kind of like saw every aspect of it as I was coming through it, and I'm watching this happen. I'm like, you shouldn't feel threatened by React Native. You should feel like this is an opportunity, and know that this community needs you. Like the iOS developers are needed there, the Android developers are needed there, because we want to see that perspective. And I've tried to really kind of make that. Now I think that we're beyond that now. People are starting to see the value of it, and they're moving into it. And we see people. I talked to Orta Thurax, who is a legend in open source, and he said that at one of his previous companies, they switched over to React Native even before they needed multi-platform. Like they only needed iOS, and he still switched over to React Native, just because they saw the benefits, the productivity benefits and things like that. So
I had a contracting gig once where I was contracting to build the Android app. I worked with the Android dev. We sat down and was like, okay, I'll figure out all this native stuff. I think we can do this a lot faster in React Native. He hadn't used it before, but really wanted to. And we looked into the options. He hated the UI layer in Android. We had the app working in like 3 days, and ended up going to the manager like, hey, we have the whole app working. The iOS team has been working on their native app for 4 months. Can we try port it to Android or to iOS? We're told no. That wasn't enough to stop Gustavo, and he went and ported the whole thing to iOS like overnight. And now we had a working app on both platforms in 4 days, when it took the native platform over 3 months. That's the React Native
I've heard
experience.
so many of these stories. It's yeah.
Yeah, but I absolutely agree. It's like a cultural change, or it's a staffing change, and it has to be one or the other. And the problem I see more than anything, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, is a lack of willingness to be stricter with the people who are holding back the company. Like a media company not using React Native and not enabling their user-facing engineers to face users on native platforms is going to make those platforms fall behind and be a lackluster experience. Twitch's growth is hampered by their focus on native mobile platforms. They would be a much more successful platform if their mobile platform could keep up with their web platform and with the competition in the space. They're outright failing because of these things. I think the people who make those decisions should have repercussions, and they don't.
Yeah. I tend to agree with that. I think that you do have a certain responsibility as a leader to to listen to people and understand what their concerns are and things like that, and make sure that that they have some sense of ownership in the process and feel like they have feedback and all that. At some point, though, when someone is just being obstinate to be obstinate, you have to move on, and you have to say, well, this is the direction we're going, and execute some leadership there. In the past, like when I first started my business in 2005, and I started hiring people, I was probably a little too, this is how it is, suck it up. I was a little too that way, probably. There's some people that still work with me that worked with me back then, and they can attest to that. As I grew as a leader, I got better at listening to people. But there are some times where I'll just be like, no, we're doing it this way. Let's move on. You know, like, let's not just have the whole thing stagnate because someone doesn't want to learn, doesn't want to grow, or has certain, or maybe just isn't a good fit. Sometimes it's not something negative like that. Sometimes it's just not what they want to do. Go work for Apple, you know, go work for wherever, like go do that thing. That's what you want to really do. I really like how you said in your previous monologue rant, I don't know, where you say,
call it a rant. That's the best word for what I do.
they didn't care about Twitch. They cared about like resume driven development, right? Like that's what they wanted. They wanted their you know, the resume. They didn't care about what Twitch was all about. Maybe they understood, they didn't care. And so from my standpoint, that you're exactly right. That has to be, you have to be thinking in those terms. And sometimes tech decisions are wrong, and it's okay. It's okay to make a wrong decision once in a while. That's fine. In fact, one of the things that I, as a developer, and all developers are opinionated, I've learned is that sometimes it's okay to let a bad decision happen, as long as everybody's willing to come back and evaluate, look at, see what, you know, just be empirical about it. Like, what were the effects of it? How did this how did this impact things? Was it negative? Can we roll that back? Can we go a different direction? If you feel like when a decision is made, it never can be revisited, then you're going to dig your heels in, because the repercussions of a new decision are just so vast. I like doing things as experiments. Like, we do a lot of projects. So when we're considering a stack change, so for example, right now, our primary state management library is MobX State Tree. I'm primary maintainer of it right now. I'm not wedded to it. It's just what we've used for 4 years. There's some really cool things about it. I like it better than Redux. But if we want to try something different, let's do it on a new project. Let's get buy-in from the client. Let's get buy-in from the primary developer. Let's try it. At the end of the project, they'll have actually used it. They'll know what they're talking about, and they can come back and give a report. How did it go? If it was like, well, need more info, let's do it again. Do another experiment. Try it out. See how it goes. Before we bring it back and like change Ignite to now all of a sudden that's what we're doing. So I'm a big fan of experimentation, being willing to revisit decisions, things like that, and not digging your heels so much that you just stall progress forever because you're just like super anxious about anything changing.
I'm gonna go on another light rant on this one. This is something I care way too much about. There's a meme in my community, the ship of Theosius. I build in a way where every piece is selected by its replaceability first and its usability second. If I can't replace something, I will not use that thing. I am not interested. And I'm more likely to move off of React than TRPC at this point, but I'm able to move off of either relatively easily. Not like snap my fingers and it's done, but one rough weekend later, we could be a solid JS code base. I'm confident in that. It wouldn't be the best weekend of my life, but I could do it. And I think it's so important to build in a way where you do this because it makes failure so much safer. It makes making the wrong decision much more reversible. I'm actually a little sad lately because I don't have either the opportunities or really the remaining decisions to get to make these types of wrong decisions anymore. And that's where I grow the most and where I improve the fastest. The best way to get good at something is to be bad at something. The best way. And to make mistakes constantly. You don't learn to skateboard by sitting in class for 8 hours a day, being told how skateboards work and taking a test on paper about how the wheels turn. You learn to skateboard by going out in the street and hitting the ground over and over and over again. That's how you build great things. And I have always hated how developers, I feel like as they get more senior, get more more
entrenched.
Entrenched and generally less willing to be wrong, and they won't put themselves in positions where they feel stupid anymore. And I think it's so important to do. We've changed our database layer 4 times at Ping since I did the init in July for the first commit. We started on worker KV. I moved to Heroku for all of 3 hours, and then I moved over to RDS. We stayed there for a bit, and then I was hitting connection limits. My options were spin up a pool or try something else. I had some friends that were interested in Planet Scale. I was down to be the first one to explore it, and moved us over randomly with a hacky PG dump I ported to MySQL with a script, not realizing our biggest client was live, and they had no issues live when I switched out our database.
Mm.
And that was when I realized, oh, we really have built this in a way where we can like hot swap essential parts, and that's fine. I can make the wrong decision as long as we can walk it back. I call this safety net driven development. I'm so tired of the guardrails we always prescribe, like the unit test first, TDD, all of these things that are guardrails that guide you one way. You need to be able to fall, because there will always be things that are not on the intended path. And I need my developers to be confident that they can try those things and fail those things. And I will always make the decisions that enable failure to be bounced back from, rather than trying to prevent it in the first place.
There's a book, which you may have read, Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder, by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And I'm a big fan of that book, because I tend to be a little disorderly myself, but I build my life in such a way where the disorder is not so disruptive. Because if you structure your life, and this is kind of speaking to your point there, Theo, if you structure your life where everything has to be stacked perfectly, so you plan everything out, you're like, okay, when I put this block there, it's just gonna land just like this, then if you don't do that, then things get thrown off big time. But if you know that things are gonna kind of like stack up in kind of haphazard ways, you can build your life in such a way where it's not going to really cause a major issue. Now, you still have to interface with other people, obviously, and I've learned to kind of be a little less disruptive about some things as I've gotten older. But I very much agree with that idea of like being anti-fragile. Like, don't. And anti-fragile is not. It doesn't mean like it's not necessarily the opposite of fragile. It's more like understanding that things can be fragile and building the app in such a way where if something is fragile, like, and you rip it out and you replace it with something else, it's the whole system doesn't come to a screeching halt. And that you build muscles by experiencing those pains and doing those things. And if you do that, regularly, if that's just sort of part of your process, part of your work, you're going to end up in a better place at the end. And so I do agree with that. I think that's a good way to look at it. And sometimes you do need to commit to something and be like, okay, well, we're gonna go with this. There are times that needs to happen, but those should be more exceptions, I think, rather than the rule.
Yeah, I find that when you end up in those positions, it's very clear why you're there and why you need to. Like, one for us, I have no reason not to share this. We were using Pusher as our like WebSocket layer to do things like send messages, notify you when someone joins the call, notify you when like the event should go live, stuff like that. And Pusher was a great starting point for us to stay serverless and be a fully serverless company with a single Vercel Lambda. However, it did not give us the granularity or specifically the presence that we needed to do some of the more dynamic stuff we wanted to.
Yeah.
I had a friend working at Ably. He's been pushing me to consider their real-time solutions for a while. And I had for like 4 months, I'd had it in the back of my head, like, Ably has these things it can enable. It can replace our like jank solution in these ways. And it was up until we had really hard pain points where we had a problem and Pusher was not built in a way that could solve it, that we made the decision to move over to Ably. It wasn't, we want to try this new thing, so much as we have a pain point. We know why we have that pain point. We know this thing solves it and is a superset of our current solution. We should move to that.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a lot of alignment here in how we think. So this has been a super awesome discussion. I can go for probably another 10 minutes here, and then I have some other stuff I probably need to jump off and do. I have not got through all of my list, and I know there's some more questions. Was there anything that caught your eye in the chat for questions? I can look through as well.
Someone asked, what is like the single thing that if we had unlimited time or resources, we would change in React or React Native? I don't actually know. If you have one, please go, but I don't off the top of my head.
That is a really good question. That's a really good question. Yeah. The problem is that the thing that I would change is probably not a single thing. It's with unlimited time and resources, I would be focused on far more developer tools. Better inspectability, Things like Flipper, they're great, but I would dump a lot more time into that. Make Flipper awesome, like really fantastic. I would probably add a REPL, read, evaluate, basically a console for React Native. I was complaining the other day that one of my previous systems that I used, which is called Ruby Motion, for native development, had this awesome REPL where you could literally go in there, CD into objects, sort of like Pry if you've done any Ruby. You could CD into objects and run methods and change things just right in your console, even better than like a Chrome inspector console. It's fantastic. You could like command click on a view and just be in that view and be able to make changes to props and stuff like that. I would do stuff like that. We have this thing called Reactotron, which allows for some inspecting and logging and state stuff. You can also like run custom commands and stuff like that. It's sort of in that vein. But unfortunately, I don't have unlimited time and resources, so it's only so far. But that would be where I would focus developer tooling. There are some things that where React Native still lags behind web, just because it's a much smaller community compared to web.
I would rewrite in TypeScript. That's about it.
Rewrite the whole
React in TypeScript.
React Native. That makes sense.
React specifically,
Yeah.
but like React Native being TypeScript, cool, whatever. React itself and like the things that it exports, like
flow.
The amount of back and forth around the React FC typing and shit like that. Like I don't care because I know what's underneath React well enough to ignore the types when they're wrong. But it would be nice if they were right and they meant something. That would be really cool. As a full stack TypeScript dev, more people need to take advantage of types, even if it's hard as a library maintainer, which I need to say more often. I'm a huge TypeScript evangelist. For us developers facing users, it is phenomenal. But for developers facing developers building like libraries and SDKs and the things that we're NPM installing, TypeScript's a lot harder to do and maintain in those ways. So shout out to those people. The burden's on their shoulders, and that's why it's such a good experience for us. Yeah.
I think that'd be a fantastic direction. Just rewrite it in TypeScript. But yeah, I mean, I get why they don't. That's a big, and they use Flow internally. There's some friction there for sure.
Yeah, and I get why they use Flow. Is like the power of having your language in your mono repo and being able to make changes to the language when things aren't working. That sounds really cool, and I get why a company like Facebook and Meta would benefit from that. But it's honestly, I consider React being an open source thing we can use luck more than practice, and as such, it's scary to make any recommendations because any one of them could be the thing that like ends up killing it.
Yeah, totally. Rodrigo is wondering about Ionic and Capacitor, whether we have opinions on them.
I don't.
If you want to go, you can.
I don't have much, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I know they kind of brand themselves as they're not. I'm gonna show my age. PhoneGap, which is the original kind of version of that. And there are some differences there with Capacitor and stuff, but at the end of the day, I look at Ionic and I look at anything that is using a web view, wrapped in a web view like that, and I just think the time for this has passed. Like, we have React Native now. Like, why are we using a web browser when we have Yoga, for example, is a layout engine for native, and that's what we're using. Why load up a whole browser with all of the stuff that comes with that in order to just put boxes on a screen? Like, why are we doing that? It's so heavy compared.
But I heard React Native is slow.
Me as I'm sorry, what?
I heard React Native is slow though, and Ionic's fast. It's the new thing. It has to be faster.
Has to be. And I realize it may sound weird because we use Electron, for example, on desktop, but the reality is that React Native for desktop isn't at the same place that React Native for mobile is. And if React Native for desktop was at the same place as mobile, if it was really, really, really good, then you wouldn't use Electron. You would use React Native for desktop. That's what you do because it's better. It's a better paradigm. That's my opinion.
Yep, I agree. I also think it's important to know that like it took, how many years would you say it took for React Native to get to a particularly usable state where you would recommend it? For me, it's at least like 3.5, 4.
It was probably in that range. Yeah, I mean, we obviously were building and shipping apps, but it was painful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize how much time and community effort it took for React Native to be usable. And it took a lot of your work to make that happen over at Infinite Red. Things like Ignite really did ignite React Native and its adoption. It made it usable. Ionic, thankfully, is more focused on making a smooth adoption experience, but everything else still takes years to do. And competing with and catching up to React is so hard that take a look at Flutter. Like just look over the, like, imagine having Google's money and still not being able to make the iOS apps perform at higher than 15 FPS when you use native animations. Like, what the hell's going on over there? But I don't want to go too deep into that. Ionic seems cool. I don't want to buy into something that doesn't have the time, the brains, and the backing of React Native.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. No, this has been great, Theo. I really appreciate catching up with you on this stuff. I think we could probably talk all day about all this stuff. But
I have another call I have to hop to with my team anyway. So yeah, this is a good place to wrap it up.
I'm running up against the clock as well. But hey, thanks for everybody in Theo's community as well for jumping along with us. Really appreciate that. And thanks to my own smaller Twitch community. I appreciate everybody hanging out. I've been gone for my people. I'm talking to you. I've been gone for a month. I'm sorry, but I'm back. I was on vacation. I was in Florida. I was not around somewhere where I could stream. But I am back, and I'm planning to do some things. We have some cool guests coming up, and obviously, thank you so much, Theo, for not only coming on my stream, but also co-hosting it here, like whatever you call it, hosting it because of my internet issues. I appreciate all your expertise on that.
More than happy. This is what I do. And honestly, like, quick plug to Ping, that logo here, ping.gg.
Oh,
that's why I'm able to do this. It's so powerful. Like, we're in a call. I can copy paste him into my OBS and then run it. Or as Monday mentioned earlier, he could copy paste both of our links into his OBS and without even being on the show, run our stream for us. It's not what we built the product for, but when you make good enough pipes and good enough primitives, people build crazy things on top. We have somebody recreating Star Trek Live using Ping.
I love it. I just have to give my own little I'm gonna be signing up for Ping when we get off this, and I'm gonna be using it because that was a way better experience than what I've done. So thanks so much, Theo, and your team for building it. It looks awesome.
Of course. It was hard work, but I'm so happy we did it. Yeah. I need to run, so I don't have time to find someone to raid. I am sorry, but I trust the 58 of y'all to find someone cool to watch. Great show as always. See you guys on probably Wednesday for me. Peace.